Hi, in this video we will look at the P&L and expenses and contribution margin of the individual hotel. So this is a sample of a overall P&L. Since we are discussing the high level strategic course. We will not go into deep details of each line item in the P&L or individual P&Ls. What we are trying to understand is where are the major things where as a strategic owner or as a strategic person who is analyzing the P&L should look for. So in the P&L, normally there are two major costs. One is labor cost, and one is another cost. So normally in the P&L, we split the total cost. For example, as an example, I have shown you here payroll related expenses and the other expenses. Since payroll related expenses are fixed, it may not increase or reduce as per the business levels. So if the payroll expenses are increasing significantly compared to the business levels, there is a problem, or even if it's not reducing as per the lower business level, there's not really much the hotels can do usually, because most of the labor is fixed, except in certain countries where they are allowed to hire more casual labor or contract labor. But in certain locations the labor is very fixed. You may high if it doesn't matter if you have a short spike in the business or lower business levels. You may not be able to reduce the labor cost in a very short term, and it is not advisable as well to reduce the labor cost in a short term, because labor comes with a very expensive training, very expensive morale, motivation, staff benefits. So these are all not so easy to maintain. So if you even if so the outlook is on to look at the longer term of the business. As we said earlier, we have to look at the future business possible potential, not on the past. So even if the business has been down in the past, or if it's what we need to look at it, what's going to happen in the next 6 months to 1 year, so that we can make certain decisions on the labor cost. If the business is estimated to bounce back, then you have to accept the labor, because if you drop the labor for 6 months, the cost of retraining, cost of rehiring may be much more than the what how much you can save. Then the other expenses, which are mostly related to they are related to the revenue and the business level. So here in this case, for example, we see that other expenses are all 13% of the total revenue, which is making sense, because the most of the other expenses are related to the business level, the stationery, the complementary services in the rooms division. So in the rooms division, mostly you have complementary expenses, commission, operating supplies, cleaning expenses. Those are all related to the occupancy levels in the hotel. For example, TV channels, they are not related to the occupancy of the hotel. You have a fixed subscription. So even if the business drop, you normally are not able to reduce this cost. However, you may be able to negotiate with the service provider for a short-term discount or some other measures to reduce the cost related to the short spikes in the business, or you will negotiate the deal that you may pay higher amount when you have a higher occupancy, you may pay lower amount when you have lower occupancy. So these are, and commission, for example, it may not vary as the business level, because those are depend on what kind of business segment we are getting. If you are getting mostly over online travel agents, you may have to pay a commission if there is a drop in, let's say, good business. So the commission expense will not drop, because the expenses are still in if the other business coming from the online travel agent is the same. So you cannot see every expense as a percentage of revenue. Some expenses are depend on the type of business segment. So before we jump into the conclusions of analyzing the revenue as a percentage to revenue or as a percentage to occupied room nights, we really need to see what are the major expenses, what how is are they related to a particular segment. If they are related to a particular segment, we need to measure them only but as a relative, as a ratio to that particular segment. Otherwise you may get a wrong analysis and wrong decision. In F&B, mostly or the other expenses which are of importance other than the labor is menu expenses, menu and beverage costs, operating supplies and entertainment. These expenses are not directly related to the labor to the business levels, because entertainment is sometimes mostly fixed. You have to pay the entertainment expenses. You have business or you may not have business. Menu depends on the quality of menu in the hotel. If they are damaged, you cannot say we have a low business, so we don't need to change the menu. You still have to change the menu, because it's the brand the brand awareness or the brand value of the hotel, and is the image value of the hotel. Operating supplies goes by the same. If the glasses are broken, doesn't matter if you have occupancy or you don't have occupancy, you still need to maintain the par level. So there are par level reports, there are inventory reports, which usually we are looking at when we are assessing the business performance, but also we are looking at who is actually consuming those expenses, and is it they are related, if that particular segment's business is in line with the expenses or not, then only we can analyze these expenses. So labor, we normally, since it's a fixed cost, most of the time we measure the labor by the labor productivity. So what is the labor productivity? Labor productivity is output produced per FTE. So labor productivity means how many rooms we are cleaning per hour. So what is the output? Output may be the number of rooms cleaned by the housekeepers. It can be cover served. It can be the laundry kilograms washed by a particular laundry staff. So labor productivity is usually measured in full-time equivalents. If let's say the hotel is hiring casual laborers, contract laborers, so instead of directly saying that we need to reduce, if the business is reduced by 20%, we need to reduce labor by also 20%. Not not that way, because there are minimum level of staff that you need. You may need a minimum level of managers, supervisors, but we can definitely look at the productivity level of the other staff, where by comparing them to the output that they are producing. So you can manage your leaves, you can manage them to go on the unpaid leaves, or you can send them on compulsory paid leaves to save on the other expenses in line with the expected productivity, expected output that is going to be generated. So labor productivity will help us to roster our employees in a way. So FTE is normally inclusive of permanent, casual, overtime, and minus the leave. So in order to maintain the FTE, because the job of the labor productivity reports is also to enable us to roster the future. So you can easily manage your casuals, your overtimes, and then the leaves, so that you can manage your FTE. Permanents also we can reduce if there is a longer downturn in the business. So productivity comparison, usually the hotels have their own benchmarks based on the history or based on the industry standards. So productivity is always compared with some sort of standards and benchmark which the hotel has to identify. Otherwise, you can use the industry comparable. There are now industry comparable reports available in the market. For example, housekeeping room, a number of rooms cleaned. Industry standard is 12, 13 for a city hotel, and maybe 10 or 12 for a resort hotel, depending on the size of the room as well. Because if the larger the room, the longer it will take to clean it, and the more furniture or more loose things in the room, the longer it will take. The more complicate furniture in the room, the longer it will take to clean. So the room number, this industry standards, when you are applying, you need to compare the product apple to apple. Otherwise, the productivity, the standards may not align with the actual product, and it may again give to a wrong decision. And also the previous trends finally. There are other expenses which also need to be managed, undistributed expenses, which are normally called advertising expense, marketing expense, administration expense, and utility. Here also we can divide them into two parts: payroll and other expenses. Usually most of these expenses are fixed. Payroll is fixed, utilities are 80% fixed, because you still need to run most of the hotels have fixed big equipments which they still need to run even if there's no occupancy. For example, central air conditions. If the hotel has individual air conditions, then it's a different story. You can still manage the expenses. So it depends what kind of expenses, what kind of hotel structure we have. So normally we split the expenses between labor and non-labor, and then marketing and maintenance expenses we normally cannot compare with the revenue generated, because marketing is done for future revenue, not for the past revenue. So is you still need to spend money on marketing even if the past has not been very good, because if you don't spend the money now, the future business will also not come. Maintenance expense also does not matter with the revenue, it matters with the conditions of the property. So or as an owner, we should not be focusing to control the marketing and maintenance expenses so much, because it may affect the future performance. I have seen most of the time a lot of GMs, if the revenue is dropped, the first and easiest way to cut down the expenses and improve the profitability is cut down on the marketing expense, cut down on the maintenance expense. However, you need to really see the situation for the future. Are these expenses really needed for future sustainability? If we cutting down the marketing expense or the maintenance expense in the future, lack of marketing will lead to lower revenue. Lower revenue will lead to lower marketing expenses. So it's gonna be a spiral. So marketing expense, maintenance expense, we still have to compare. We still have to spend depending on the future outlook. But also, but definitely you can look at what are the promotions planned, what are the revenue generation, or what are the promotions planned, what are the ROI generated from those particular promotions. Are those promotions has been working or not? What are the returns generated from that, so that you can make a proper guess or proper judgment that certain promotions should continue or not. Same goes for the maintenance activities. We need to have planned maintenance activities, because that depends on, otherwise the property may run down very fast and the cost of renovations can be very high in the future. You can definitely look at the nice to have things which are, for example, not necessary now, or maybe, or but you still need to maintain the maintain the property, maybe energy efficiency, those kind of things. You still need to continue doing that depending on the ROI. Otherwise, the properties may have other, in the future it can increase and will be difficult to control. Utilities are usually fixed, but you need to run the energy saving initiatives. You can think of the future long term strategy rather than a short term spending. uh, Otherwise the hotel's profitability in the short term may be better, but in the future long term it will suffer. There are other expenses, compare going down the line, because when we are learning the ROI, we need to look at the other expenses as well. For example, foreign exchange, rental of a property, property tax, insurance. So these are the other expenses, which is property rental is not a operating expense, because it doesn't matter we have the property owned by us or rental by somebody else. The operating performance of the hotel does not really matter. So that's why it's a non-operating expense. But we need to look at that property rental. If it's related to the revenue, the calculations need to be correct. Insurance is also a very important aspect, because it's important for to do the property insurance, to do the business interruption insurance, to do the public liability insurance. To save the cost, you cannot cut down on these expenses. Public liability is usually operational expense, because it depends on the number of guests. Property damage is a non-operating expense. Depreciation, to improve the profitability, sometimes hotels are not charging their depreciation correctly, which means you may be paying a higher tax, which is not a good idea. And also depreciation charging is important, so that you charge correctly, so that you have enough money for reinvestment. Because if the depreciation is not charged properly, is charged less than it used to be, the distribution of the money will be higher, which means that you may not have enough money for reinvestment into the property or replace the fixed assets at the time when they are actually needed. So this is all about the overall P&L of the hotel. In the future videos, we're going to be learning on the other aspects of the hotel performance.